said that correctly. Founder and CEO of Knowbella Tech, joined by Amy Vernon, Issac, Elnekave, Shannon, Ewing, and Salih, Sarikaya. Take it away.
Well, for those of you that are here, thank you for attending, and hopefully we'll drag some other folks in here. We thought about maybe airdropping some tokens and staying in the room. But anyway, thank you so much for being here. And we've got a great panel lined up here. And we'll just start off with a few questions, and we'll just kind of keep it open for you guys. So feel free, if you have a question burning, pop in and we can hopefully answer it. But to kick it off here, let's start off here with Issac. And Issac, can you say a little bit about your background? And
Yeah, sure. I'm co-founder of the Tide Foundation. What the Tide protocol does is we believe that businesses are able to run their business without your personal information. So the Tide protocol goes in, removes all of your personal information, personally identifiable information, and provides you as the consumer with the only key to decrypt that data. And in doing so, we sort of protect your privacy and your ability to control the data wherever you actually create it.
And how long have you been working on that?
We've been working on the project now for coming up on 4 years.
Oh, wonderful. So you're kind of a grandfather at it.
Yeah, sometimes I do feel that way.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. And Shannon, can you give us a little background on your endeavors?
Sure. So I am the Chief Community Catalyst for Presearch.org. We are a decentralized search engine, so taking something that was meant to be a community service actually back to the community. So it's completely open source. The community provides all of the packets and the algorithms, and we have a token layer on top of it, so you're actually getting incentivized. You earn tokens for every search that you conduct, and the advertisers buy those from you. So you actually get the reward from the value you're adding to the ecosystem.
Well, now, you don't seem like a grandmother here, but the way you just rattled that off, you've clearly been in the space for a while.
All I do is attend crypto events and network with other projects, trying to find out who's solving problems and how we can put some wind at their backs and actually help move the space together. So I am a giant community service. So yeah, I talk to a lot of projects and a lot of people.
Wonderful. So next up, Amy.
Hi, I'm Amy Vernon. I run community and marketing for Rivetz, which is a basically we provide the toolkit that enables anyone to implement hardware-level security, whether it's blockchain or not, but it's especially needed in blockchain as you sort of see all these crypto wallets being cracked, social engineering to get people's credentials. My other background is 20 years as a newspaper journalist, and I'm also on the board of Civilization, which is a nonprofit dedicated to bringing civility to the online world, because that's easy.
One of the things that Amy shared with us earlier is her exciting story about open information in the state of Florida.
Yeah.
So I guess at one point Florida was the leader in pornography distribution for a couple of weeks. So
Yeah.
There's a great story there if you want to.
Completely by accident and due to open records laws.
Yeah, that would be a really good story to talk to her about, especially regarding identity and privacy. And so, Salih, can you give us a quick background?
So I'm Salih Sarikaya, co-founder of Smartereum and WhatsAround. Smartereum is a social platform for crypto investors, mostly a news platform, media platform, reaching out more than 1 million monthly people. And WhatsAround is a social networking platform for outdoor lovers and get paid doing what you love. And we just want to solve the problems of social media today and give a path for the next social media. So when you share a picture, and if it's really quality picture, and then you get rewarded for your contributions to the platform. And we are also trying to solve identity problems on the blockchain with some levels in implementing blockchain on the platform.
Well, I got a chance to see your application.
Yes.
First, to see something past MVP is really exciting. But also to look at, I've used Instagram. Unfortunately, it's an extremely complex app. It's not easy. So to see yours as a next generation Instagram is really exciting. You might become one of the next unicorns, particularly for the blockchain space. So I really like to see that.
We hope, at least we would like to be a step for the future.
Right.
for the next generation social media to solve the problems of identity monetization.
Awesome. So our first question for the panelists is, and as you know, we're going to be talking about identity and privacy, which one of the great applications for blockchain obviously is in this area. But what I'd like to do is just throw it out to the panel, just one of you who wants to tackle what exactly is identity.
Well, I'll give it a shot. Tide actually is not, we're not seeking to create a singular identity. I think there are quite a few projects out there that are looking to provide individuals with a unique identity. If you can think of it as kind of like the OAuth authentication, so I can sign into a e-commerce provider with my Facebook account, and in doing so, that is my identity. But we believe that all of us have a desire to have multiple personas online, and we should have the right to have multiple personas online. And so, as we create our different identities online, we still need to have the ability to secure the data that that individual identity created. So to us, the question of identity is very personal. What do you identify yourself as? And in very differing situations, you still need to have the right and the ability to control that persona, that identity, and the data that it creates.
Well, you raise a really interesting point, because my immediate response to that is identity is not one thing. I have a lot of different identities, and I actually joke with my husband because I know how people know him by what they call him, because he's an actor, and some people call him Antonio, some people call him Tony, some people call him, just all different names. At home, my identity is I'm a mom. But when I'm around journalists, because I spent so so much time in that space, my identity is a journalist, because I end up talking about all those things and talking about just the business and what we do. When I'm at blockchain events, my identity is focused in that area. Just it depends where I am, what time of day, and the ability. I think the promise of blockchain is the ability for us to online share the pieces of our identity with someone. If I want to share with an advertiser my age, because they're someone who I buy a lot of products from, and so I want them to know, my age and my shoe size, for example, I should be able to give that to them, and my identity to them is literally my age and my shoe size, and not all that other information. And so I think that it's a really interesting question, because identity isn't just one thing.
Yeah, I agree with that.
I actually, I love that thought, because that's that self-identification process. I come from a synthetic biology background, so I think about your DNA, how you look, what makes up your genetics, and of course those are components of identity, but they're not isolated for identity. So I like the fact that your shoe size could be an identifier.
So I have a digital sociology master degree, and also because of sociology perspective, and so we are trying to, mostly advertisers are trying to use all your identities, different social, cultural, or even governmental ID. These are all sorts of making you a product of current companies or products. Like you are becoming a product of Facebook when you use it, because you are giving all your different social or cultural or even governmental ID directly to their hands to use you as a product and market you as a product for them, market you as a product.
Yeah, that's a great point. So, Shannon, I don't know if this is a question you want to field or not, but do you have a sense now what mainstream identification management systems look like, and have a sense of whether they're good or not? So really the question is
that a thing in the U.S. right now?
Yeah.
I'm not aware of it. I think right now we have this massive, Amazon has all of this information, Facebook has that, it's spread across so many platforms. I don't know if anyone not in the kind of encrypted space is actually doing any sort of identity management aside from like 1Password. You know, like how are you, there's no streamline outside of just make sure that I don't have to type in a million different passwords, you know? So I think one thing that we're kind of coming up against in this country is even starting to have the conversation with mainstream about why you want this. Like, why do you want to own your data? You know, the GDPR is a good starting point. I think a lot of Americans still really don't care at the end of the day, you know, that there's something like, 4,000 Facebook accounts getting created every 10 minutes or something like that, you know, so even though we know that we're being harvested, at the end of the day, whatever, like we haven't even created the right lexicon here yet to have these conversations about like why I wouldn't want that to be a thing and what it means for me to take that ownership back. So in the mainstream, I'm not sure that, I'll ask the other panelists, but if you know a project, I don't.
I've actually often joked that we would actually be in trouble if Google, Facebook, and Apple decided they liked each other and were friends and wanted to work together, because then they would actually know everything about us. Everything.
Well, that's a great point. I've never heard us being harvested before. That kind of grabbed me there. Like made me feel like an apple. Right?
Yeah.
So maybe Salih, maybe this is a good question for you. How would blockchain change the way identities are managed today? So there are various ways that we manage our identity today. On the back end, on the front end, it's password and username, right? Do you have any ideas about how blockchain would enable us to manage our identities differently?
So right now we are very early level of blockchain. So if you look at some applications of blockchain, what they are doing right now for the privacy of data mainly, because when we talk about blockchain, we are obviously talking about how it will change the financial ecosystem and how it will make easier to make the transactions and how it will make cheaper for the transactions. But for the data level, we are very, very, very early level right now, because we have, like, EOS is trying to make build a system for the data protection, but it's still, there are so many ambiguities about the protocol right now. So it will be very hard and it will take some more time when we look for how we will keep the identity private in the ecosystem, because even though we are saying blockchain is right now decentralized, and I have seen so many applications of blockchain that they are doing, yes, at this basic level it's decentralized, but when they decide to change it into something else, then it's becoming totally centralized. So we are still very ahead of time for the data protection level. Like we have achieved so much on the level of transaction of finance, but we are still very early for the data protection. And I think it will take a few more years to implement it totally.
Isaac, do you have any thoughts about that?
I do, actually. I think, and Shannon brought something up beforehand. I might just take us all a step back. GDPR, as you guys know, has been implemented in the UK. And that's probably the first step towards a really comprehensive privacy legislation. But we've got a really big problem that GDPR is creating. And in many ways, it's kicking its own goal. Because what GDPR is doing is reducing the amount and the type of information that businesses can hold about you, how they hold it, and who they sell it to. Which sounds great, except that the need and the demand for data is going through the roof. And it's only going to continue. Every AI, every ML, every decision tree requires data. And the most valuable data is your personal data. So these laws that are coming into place are restricting the supply of personal data into the secondary market. The demand is increasing. And the result is the Marriott breach. It's Cathay Pacific losing 9.5 million records. It's because the value of your data sitting in current siloed and centralized databases is only increasing. And so blockchain provides us with an amazing opportunity to actually lock that data away, to remove it altogether. and to do so in a decentralized manner. So if you as an individual held the only key to decrypt your data, we can now migrate the accountability from business that's holding on to the data back to you as a consumer, which means that if you choose to introduce that data into the secondary market, you do so as part of the value chain. And we open up the availability of data into that market. Without blockchain, we would not have the ability to create a key management system that handles that.
You know, that's a really interesting idea that maybe you could trade your identity on an exchange.
Yeah.
Right? So do you guys have any thoughts about what
Yeah.
Isaac just mentioned?
We were having this conversation earlier that a lot of people are talking about how, as AI develops and the robots are coming, we're going to have this, universal basic income to support people who are going to have jobs. And one of the conversations I'm really interested in holding with different people is what happens when we actually do begin to monetize that data. What is my microbiome worth to a pharmaceutical company that now doesn't have to do the same amount of research because I just unlocked it for them? What does my attention have to do for retailers? There's a project called Siglo down in Latin America that's working with the very, very bottom of the pyramid, people that didn't have email addresses, people that don't have cell phones historically. Those people are interesting still to retailers. I mean, they still buy toilet paper. They're still buying products, but we have no data on them. So Siglo is now finding ways that they can incentivize them to share a little bit of their purchases, and now they're subsidizing their cell phones. So people that didn't have access to communications before are getting connectivity based on their agreement to unlock some of those patterns. So as we look at what happens once I get my data back, because right now we don't own any of it, it's just being taken from us. But as soon as I actually start to choose where I unlock those different identities and to whom and to how much, what does that look like in terms of subsidizing people in places around the world that, like now we're talking about some serious resource exchange.
That's a fascinating concept. How do you spell that company? Siglo?
Siglo.
Siglo. Interesting. Okay. Now, what are your thoughts?
A further interesting point on that is also not just the value of the data in a monetary sense, but has anyone ever had moved and you had to get your medical records to your new doctor and you felt like you needed a PhD in who knows what to even get that to even get that achieved, to get the records, to get them to the new doctor? What if it's digitized? What if they use different systems? Oh, it's paper, so it costs $100 for a huge carton of it. It's and I used to move a lot, and as a journalist I lived in a bunch of different cities, and I just pretty much gave up. I'm just I don't know, I've never been to a doctor before, here, take my blood pressure, because it just was such a pain that it just wasn't even worth my time. And the ability to have that data that I held the key for, that anywhere in the world I'm in the UK and I'm in a car accident and I'm able to unlock my medical data so they know what drug allergies I have, so in fixing me up, just the ability, the value to yourself to be able to control certain types of data, even beyond any monetary aspect, is just tremendous and very promising.
Well, and just to truncate that, the value of that to refugee populations and transient, it changes everything.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't know what it's like here in the US, because we're an Australian project, but in Australia we have a government initiative called Personal Health Information. And it's an initiative that's been going now for about 4 years. And it's about doing something very similar to that, where the government centralizes all of your personal health records so as to give you the ability to decide who you can share that information with. And it has been an absolute disaster. The population as a whole has just said, I'm opting out, because no one trusts the government to be able to secure that data in a centralized database. And rightly so, but imagine if we could do that. Imagine if we can do that and actually make what you say come true. And so that's that can only happen through some sort of a key management system.
Right. Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, and I think, Shannon, your perspective with your experience with Doctors Without Borders is really interesting because, doctors that are moving around in borders generally are moving to places where there's warfare going on, and records just are destroyed. Property records are destroyed, medical records are destroyed. If they even existed, libraries. So I think that your background and seeing it from a refugee perspective adds an element that I hadn't thought about, which is the movement across those warfare borders.
I actually saw a company about a year ago. I'm blanking on their name. I think it's Token, TYKK. I don't remember their name, but they are working with the Red Cross in the Netherlands on identity management on the blockchain for people who live in disaster-prone areas. In that case, St. Martin, which we saw was destroyed, and it's like, fine, you have your birth certificates at the hospital, whatever. Well, the hospital's not there anymore, and everything that was on paper is gone. And so, do you exist if your birth certificate doesn't exist?
Right.
Well,
Great
yeah,
point.
thank you. And I mean, so there's like the world, the food program is doing one with Syrian refugees right now, where they're using iris scans. We have a local project in LA where there's a woman named Cecile Baird who does blockchain for good, and she's working on how to develop just a local donation system of resources for the homeless population based on facial recognition. They don't want their fingerprint taken. They don't want to go through the iris scanning. Obviously, you can't give them a card or anything because it's hard to maintain possession of anything. But they're not opposed to having their picture taken, right? So how can we find different ways to have buy-in so that people are now being able to unlock different resources? Because you're right, as a doctor, if I have to leave my home country and now I end up in a new country and I have no documentation, I'm going to be driving a cab for the rest of my life. Right? There's all of these different consequences for people not having access to these records in the first place. So I think, in some areas, this is not only going to be, for us in Western countries, this is going to be an iteration in a positive direction. In some areas, this is going to be a 0 to 1 shift of actually having access to these records and this proof of identity moving forward.
Yeah, the nice thing is that can be a least common denominator that could foreshadow the way everybody else does it, not just those that are disenfranchised. And so this brings up another question. Could identities be tokenized, and would we want to tokenize them if they could be? What are your thoughts to that?
As in monetized?
Well, that's where you go with it, right? Yeah. If you tokenize it, then potentially monetize.
I'm all for it, as long as it's totally voluntary and we're doing a good enough job, project by project, step by step, to educate people what the impact of that will be and what the consequences may be as well. Just little bits. Token Foundry is a project that helps projects ICO, and at the beginning when you sign up, they say, do you know the difference between a private and a public key? What is, what is cold storage? What is custodianship? It's a little bit of a curve, but they make you answer questions in order to participate in any of those ICOs to make sure that they're not taking money from people who don't understand what they're talking about. So if we can do little projects like that, little initiatives to help people understand more about what that means, because a lot of people are going to say, you offered me $20 to unlock my data, here you go, not knowing that you just gave your data to Cambridge Analytica. We need to make sure that we're helping people understand the conversation as we have it, because this is still technology, and we here are nerdy enough to self-educate, but a lot of people don't understand that leap the same way.
Sure. Actually, when you say we are, for our case, when you say we are trying to solve the monetization problem of the of the current social media, then you are actually saying that we are tokenizing your identities, your IDs, because we are saying we will share revenue with you, with the users, and you will be part of this new system. So actually, you will be giving permission to us to use this for some targeting options. So it's actually some kind of tokenization. Saying monetization actually meaning some kind of making your identity as a form of tokenization.
One of the things I like about your project is that location becomes an identifier.
Yes.
And you're giving monetization, you're giving rights to monetization back to those people that are providing location. I think that's really innovative.
So I thought we had a question from.
Hey, I had a question from a sort of pragmatic viewpoint. So as it stands now, you click accept on Facebook and they collect information on you in exchange for their services. But even though that's the case, you're regularly seeing Facebook and the other tech giants being hauled in front of hearings in Congress due to apparent abuses of personal information. I wonder if there's maybe an unintended consequence of putting the power in the individual to really affirmatively confer their personal information to another party. If we start to shift that really onus of due diligence in making sure that who you're giving the information to is going to use it appropriately, and do you lose recourse as the individual to count on your governmental bodies to protect you? Because you took more affirmative action, and more to the point, you got cash back. You're seeing part of the profits, and you're reaping more of the proceeds as opposed to just receiving a service. I feel like there's a potential for an unintended consequence to really shift the perception of responsibility, because now you really have control over your personal information. You're making real decisions about who to give it to and who not.
I think that is an excellent point, and people, no matter how much you explain things to them, a large number of people will not understand it. They will understand what they want to understand. I saw this time and again, just as a journalist, where I remember this one story. I had a reporter who had like 15 years more experience than I did, and I was his boss, and I was just like, you need to talk to people and find out their feelings on this project that's going on, because I don't think they actually understand what it is. And he's like, oh, no, they totally understand. We've reported that. I said, ask people. And he came back and he said, you were totally right. Everybody thought that this project was something completely different, because one person had said it was that, and that's the person they decided that they believed. And there are a lot of unintended consequences, and I think that there's a difference between giving people the ability to control their identity and to release parts of their identity for things that they need to really be able to, like the doctor examples are a perfect example. It's like, yes, you want your doctor to have your full medical records, but how do you can't expect people to properly vet everyone who is asking them for that. So it's a really, really good question.
I'll just take the questions in a sec, because I'd like to get something out. This is an area that I feel quite passionately about. I've had quite a few conversations about this. Let's start with what's happening today. Today I have zero control. I have zero visibility to what's going on, right? Nothing. Let's take it to the next step, where I now have the responsibility. And maybe I'm acting in the same way as I did before. Yes, I click, and I'm not reading 71 pages of privacy data. So how do we solve that? Because if we can solve that, then we've actually figured out the rest of the piece. And we solve that in a decentralized approach as well. Because there are going to be bad actors. There are going to be people that I have sold my data to thinking they're going to do one thing, and they're going to do something else. In the absence of bad actors, I'm very much in a better space. How do we identify those bad actors? How do we allow all of us to say, I had a bad experience with this person? And to provide a feedback loop internally and globally. Because if we can do that, then I'm better off than I am today. I have control, but I'm also able to see who is a bad actor in the space. So to get there, we have to start from the beginning. Not about tokenizing your identity, but about giving you the ability to say, no, my data is going nowhere, first and foremost. And then we can take the next step. Sorry.
Well, and I actually, the last point you made, the ability to say no, is that What's more important is the ability to say yes, where the default is no.
Yes.
Because we're in a complete opt-out society. I actually was speaking with this organization that I work with. We were speaking to the staff in one of the Congresswomen's offices in New Jersey, and we were trying to explain to them how everything on Facebook and all these platforms is opt-out instead of opt-in. And they were flabbergasted. They were like, what do you mean you have to choose to say no? And that the thing is, we don't want to give people it's not giving people the ability to say no, it's giving them the ability to say yes, because the default should be no.
Agreed.
Yeah, and so one of the things that I think this ties back to, and Isaac, I think you're kind of touching to this, is how do we go today about eliminating breaches? You know, Marriott just had this significant issue, and now I've heard there's even more involvement beyond Marriott. So how do we go about addressing that today before we leap to a blockchain solution? You know, how would you address that? And Amy, I think this might be something that you'd also really want to jump into from a hardware perspective.
Actually, even before I speak, we were talking about that issue right before, and I wondered if you wanted to talk about the idea of everything being open.
Privacy being the enemy?
Yes. This is a really interesting conversation.
There's a man named Gary LaChance who wrote a white paper in 2016 entitled Privacy is the Enemy, in which he asked the question, if we already have so much taken from us, if there's CCTV in London, if there's all sorts of data being harvested from us online, they already know so much about us, are we able to pull any of this back and go private from here? Like, maybe it's not possible anymore. So therefore, what can we do to actually take the power back? We go fully public. So everything goes online. Our bank records, our health records, everything. And then that way there's no such thing as identity theft anymore, because if money leaves my bank account, we can see where it went. You know, and so what control and agency do we have here, and how can we actually take some of that back? So I think it's terrifying, but it's really interesting.
Yeah.
I think that's
You're right ahead in STD.
Yeah, that's right. But I think to go back, you know, what organizations are trying to do today, if we accept the fact that your personally identifiable information is so valuable and it's sitting inside of their databases, what they're doing today is kind of like, I don't know, sweeping the house in the middle of a sandstorm with the door open, because it's just pointless. The value of that data is such that it is just insane.